Why merely poison someone when you can throw a sword and a chandelier at them first, then poison them? Over the top, goofy, and downright bizarre. These death scenes bring down otherwise fantastic movies. Spoilers ahead for all the movies we talk about. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is spectacular in general, and while The Dark Knight Rises isn't perfect, it's still a great film. But there's one slip-up Nolan makes at the end of the final film, the death of Talia al Ghul. After her vehicle flies off the edge of an overpass, Talia gives one last speech before she succumbs to her injuries. It's a bit difficult to buy that Talia is fatally injured from the crash while Jim Gordon survives with barely a scratch, and he wasn't even wearing a seatbelt or in a seat at all. Then Talia conveniently dies the exact moment her villain monologue is over. And what a death! Talia dies delicately, fluttering her eyelashes and then tilting her head to the side in the universal signal for "I've just croaked," as one Redditor wrote. Damn, I loved the trilogy, but I forgot how awful her death was. You knew this was coming, Jack's notorious death from Titanic. Don't get us wrong, the acting in that scene is top-notch, but there's really no avoiding that this moment from Titanic makes no sense.
I don't know about you, but I intend to write a strongly worded letter.
Jack dies trying to keep Rose afloat, even though there is plenty of room on their makeshift raft. Shouldn't that extra space have been enough to keep them both alive? It's a question that, unlike Jack, never died. The Mythbusters tackled the problem, and the actors have been plagued with questions about it for years.
Did you mention it at the time? Were you like, should we make the door smaller?
Like I said, I have no comment.
The director himself tested this theory in the documentary Titanic 25 years later with James Cameron. He found that, yes, it would have been possible for Jack to join her on the door, but other factors, such as whether or not their vital organs would still be submerged, meant that the odds of survival might have been lower for both of them in that scenario. Cameron concluded, I think his thought process was, I'm not going to do one thing that jeopardizes her, and that's 100% in character. In the 2012 film Les Misérables, Police Inspector Javert has spent years tracking down the thief Jean Valjean, only to realize that Valjean is actually a decent guy. Unable to reconcile this discovery with the principles he has believed all his life, Javert hurls himself off a bridge. By all rights, it should be an emotional moment, but this scene doesn't quite resonate with the gravitas that it should. Some viewers have pointed out that the way Javert hits the water is perhaps a little too realistic. Instead of plunging into the river, his body collides with a concrete barrier just below the water's surface with an audible crunch. We get that the film is supposed to be gritty, but did it really need to be so graphic? To add insult to injury, Crow's singing here isn't that good. That's one thing almost every critic agrees on. Crow's singing isn't up to par with the other cast members. One YouTuber points out that this is possibly because Crow was taught how to sing by multiple vocal coaches, each with their own methodology, so Crow probably received conflicting advice. Viewers will inevitably compare his vocal performance to those of Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman, as well as the various actors who have played Javert on stage. Some audience members might argue that this death scene from Bird Box is hardly the only questionable moment from the movie, and that's certainly a valid take, but would argue that the movie doesn't start to really go downhill until the death of Charlie. In this scene, the heroes are holed up inside a supermarket to escape the mysterious creatures that convince anybody who sees them to kill themselves. A store worker named Fish Finger tries to force his way out of the back room, begging the heroes to behold the creatures in all their beauty. As it becomes increasingly clear that the rest of the group can't hold him back, Charlie makes an off-the-cuff decision to sacrifice himself. It's supposed to be heroic, we guess, but it's completely pointless. Surely there were dozens of ways to get that door closed without Charlie sacrificing himself. A well-placed kick would have forced Fish Finger to retreat. John Malkovich has a shotgun, and he's not even helping the others hold the door back. From Dusk Till Dawn starts out promising, with brothers Seth and Richie on the run from the law. Many viewers immediately fall in love with this pair of bickering anti-heroes. Even when the two brothers massacre everyone in a store, you can't help but go along with George Clooney's charisma, and to an extent, that goodwill carries over to Quentin Tarantino's Richie. At least that is until Richie pressures their hostage Gloria to sit on the bed next to him. In the next scene, Gloria is dead, and Richie is completely nonchalant about everything. His brother is rightfully horrified.
I need an explanation. What is the matter with you?
In this moment, Richie goes from being a socially awkward, albeit trigger-happy weirdo, to a complete psycho, which would be fine for the purposes of the story, if we weren't also supposed to care about him when he dies a violent death later in the movie. Richie's death is supposed to be one of Seth's crucial motivations for the rest of the movie, but this is undermined by the fact that viewers will likely feel relieved that Richie is gone. Whether it's the ghost from Beetlejuice or the Corpse Bride in Corpse Bride, Tim Burton can always manage to make the morbid seem cute.
A doorstep!
Except of course when it stops being cute. When Burton directed Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, he adapted this dark Broadway musical with appropriate heaviness. However, there is one moment in the film that may have gone too far: the death of Mrs. Lovett. On the stage, Mrs. Lovett's death is definitely dark, but not usually graphic. But Burton takes full advantage of the cinematic medium to show Todd hurling Mrs. Lovett into the furnace. Rather than cutting away, the camera hovers unflinchingly on Mrs. Lovett as she writhes in agony. Does it ruin the movie? Not totally. Before this, we've seen dozens of mutilated bodies dumped in the basement below. We've witnessed the hero unwittingly slit his wife's throat. We know the pies are people, but even in such a bleak and gory movie, this is one horror too many. The whole sequence is gratuitous and bound to make even the most stoic viewers squeamish. Most adaptations of Shakespeare add their own spin on events to distinguish themselves from previous adaptations of the play. But despite having a Rotten Tomatoes score of well over 90%, the 1996 film Hamlet contains one death scene that is too hilarious to take seriously. In the original play, the stage directions simply say that Hamlet stabs Claudius with a poisoned sword and forces him to drink the poison that was intended for Hamlet. Pretty straightforward, right? Not to be outdone, director and star Kenneth Branagh gives Claudius a more extravagant death, or 3 to be exact. First, he hurls a saber across the room, pinning Claudius to his throne. Then, for good measure, Hamlet sends the chandelier crashing down on the king. Then he gets around to force-feeding Claudius the lethal poison. Any one of these would have made a fitting death for King Claudius, but all 3 at once takes it a little too close to Monty Python territory.
Defend me, friends! I am but hurt!
'Tis but a scratch.
The film adaptation of Cloud Atlas was met with a mixed response. Although detractors of the film consider it indulgent and its defenders insist that the film is an underrated gem, most folks agree that Cloud Atlas is meant to be a serious drama. But the scene with Dermot Hoggins and Felix Finch does a complete 180 on the tone. As Hoggins, Tom Hanks gives a performance that is not subtle in the least. The author pouts about a negative review Finch wrote about his book, before grabbing the critic and hurling him off the roof. You can't help but laugh at the whole scenario. Maybe it's the way Hoggins bangs 2 food trays together to get everyone's attention and then clumsily tosses them aside like a child that's gotten bored with his toys. Maybe it's the way the film goes out of its way to show Finch falling. Or maybe it's the way that Timothy Cavendish narrates the event as if he's merely describing an amusing party trick.
If I'm honest, I admit that the obvious emotions like shock and horror flew as Finch had, here and gone.
Whatever the reason, viewers on Reddit felt the scene was too silly and seemed out of place in the otherwise serious film. One Redditor argued this over-the-top performance was especially disappointing coming from such a talented actor. The chain of events from Cruella that shape Estella into the villainous Cruella begins with the death of Catherine, who was later revealed to be Estella's adoptive mother. The Baroness's pet Dalmatians charge towards Catherine, who stands petrified until the dogs knock her off the edge of a cliff. This ridiculous scenario was immediately ridiculed with countless memes. It's supposed to be a tragic moment that transforms Estella, but it's impossible to take the scene seriously. Viewers don't even need to watch Estella's mother die to empathize with a misunderstood heroine. It's really just a contrived way to give Cruella a tragic backstory, especially since the movie already had plenty of reasons to explain how Cruella became so cruel. After all, Estella realizes later in the movie that she takes after her birth mother, the Baroness. The film suggests that Estella has always had a little bit of that madness inside of her, and her mother's death was simply an excuse to unleash it. What's even worse is that fans have easily been able to come up with more convincing backstories. For instance, one ex-user wrote, "A more compelling Cruella origin story would have been if her mother had a pair of Dalmatians that she loved and spoiled and pampered, but she never wanted a child, so all of the affection went to the dogs." See, that wasn't hard. Just like that, you have a more emotional foundation than having a pack of CGI dogs scare your mom off a cliff. Denethor's death in The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King 100% completely ruins the movie. Okay, yeah, let's backtrack on that slightly. It in no way ruins the movie, but it's a little over the top, so let's talk about it. The whole thing starts out as a deeply emotional scene in which Denethor, believing his son Faramir is dead, tries to burn himself alive on his son's funeral pyre. Gandalf and Pippin save Faramir at the last minute, and Denethor, engulfed in flames and too late realizing his folly, hurls himself off one of Minas Tirith's many ramparts. It looks great until you stop to think about it a little. As one Redditor said, yeah, if he was trying to die to stop the pain, he should have just turned left and aimed for the shorter distance to the edge. Then there's Gandalf's reaction. Rather than lifting a finger to help the man who's burning to death, Gandalf is pretty cool about it.
So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion.
Fair enough, but again, Denethor still has quite a jog ahead of him when he says that. He could definitely have chased him down and tried to put out the flames. Even Peter Jackson mentioned in the audio commentary that the scene was sort of ridiculous, but he kept it because it looked cool.